All right. And we are back once again to the PSIA Fireside Chat. This is our fifth episode of the PSIA Fireside Chat. Welcome once again. I am your host, Alan. And for tonight, we'll talk about global market opportunities. We are joined by some of leaders of the IT industry representing different countries. So we're gladly joined. We're happy to have some of our guests from Japan, from Taiwan, and UK to talk about the different market opportunities for software and IT. And we'll talk about potential opportunities for outsourcing, software development, services, and anything under the sun. So I guess we'll start introducing our guests. We'll start off with, of course, the most beautiful lady in the panel, Miss Tay Abion. So Tay is also a PSIA board director along with me. And she's a Japanese consultant and facilitator here in Manila for the last 23 years. So aside from running her own business, Spikes Works, for the last 20 years, she's been serving the PSIA as one of the directors in the last 13 years. She's also leading us in the Japan mission since 2008. So a lot of our members are attending the SODEC, right? So you probably met Tay for all those activities. Also, business matching events with Philippines and Japan together with JICA, right? So there was one event that was held last February where 37 companies have joined together and contributed about 100 meetings between Filipinos and Japanese companies. So she is a strong believer that IT industries in Japan and Philippines have great synergy to excel in the global market. So ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Tay Abion, perhaps you'd like to explain something about the Japan market and opportunities just to start off.
Okay, thank you, Alan, and hi everyone. I'm Tai, or nickname Abion. So I talk about Japan market, but I've been based in Manila the past 23 years, and then as Alan said, I've been leading the business mission annually to Japan for PSIA since 2008. So just very quickly, opportunity-wise, I think the software development and IT outsourcing opportunity from Japan is still in a growing trend. Primarily because the IT talent shortage in Japan is really severe. Some research or prediction says by 2030, Japan will be short of 790,000 IT engineers. So where will they go source those engineers, right? So yeah, just to open it, opportunities from Japan is still very huge. Thanks, Alan.
All right, thank you, Tay. You're not the only one who mentioned that. I heard that also from Hiroki. I think a lot of Japanese understood that there's opportunity for IT programmers, and there's the lacking of manpower from Japan. So thank you, Miss Tay. We'll move on to our next speaker, next panelist. We have Mr. Mike Ignacio. So Mike is with PTIC in Taipei, so he's in Taiwan now. So he's a career trade and investment diplomat by profession. So Mike is currently assigned as a trade representative and director of commercial affairs in the Manila Economic and Cultural Office in Taipei. He heads the PTIC in Taipei. And prior to Taipei, he was assigned to other countries like India, the US in San Francisco, London, Belgium, also in the EU. If you don't know, Mike is also the founder of the popular and successful Slingshot MNL back in 2015, which eventually won the Gold Anvil Awards in 2016. And Slingshot, as many of you know, is a regular event already that we do for startups in the Philippine ecosystem. He also holds a master's degree in international business from Universidad de Alicante, and he can speak Spanish. Hola, Michael.
Hola.
Right. So maybe you can, share your thoughts about the markets that you're familiar with.
All right. So first of all, thank you, Alan, Abby, and Mark. It's an honor for me to join such a distinguished panel for this fireside chat. I was quite surprised actually to get an invitation from PSIA, but yes, right now I'm a commercial diplomat for DTI in Taiwan, and I think the most important thing to note about Taiwan is that it is a hotbed of innovation because of its global leadership in electronics and semiconductors and the chips. So there's a lot of opportunities actually for software in terms of marrying software with the hardware that Taiwan produces. They're really very keen now on IoT and AI because these are the technologies that they embed into the hardware. So I think that's the opportunity with Taiwan right now.
Yeah, Taiwan's strong on the hardware side, right? There's a lot of semicon manufacturers in Taiwan. So we'll probably discuss a bit more how we can work into that and integrating software as part of that. And our third and definitely not the least panelist for today is Mark Jones. Mark Jones is the Group COO of Monster Lab, a global software company headquartered in Japan. That's also where I'm connected. He's an innovative leader that drives development of Monster Lab in terms of business, technology, and strategy, ensuring quality and operational excellence across our global markets. Mark is passionate about design and technology to benefit the society. Prior to Monster Lab, Mark was a managing director in Accenture for the digital health and public sector, working with a wide range of public and private sector clients, leading complex business and technology transformation programs in UK and globally. Hi, Mark. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you, Alan.
You may want to share your thoughts about.
Of course, yes. So I think the market at the moment is incredibly hot, and I think this is a fantastic opportunity to be in technology anywhere in the world. As we hopefully start to emerge from the pandemic, there is a race for the world's best technology talent. There is a race to digitize organizations, both large and small, and there's a significant investment and a significant demand for both more commodity IT skills, but also probably more relevantly, a lot of advanced and emerging technology, and that is around cyber, data, artificial intelligence, cloud infrastructure, IoT, and even into more traditional sort of technology areas like sort of CMS and marketing, MarTech, where consumer-facing organizations are looking to differentiate, and enterprises of all sizes are looking to digitize their organization and diffuse operational risk and create efficiencies within their organization. So I think there's probably never been a better time potentially to be in the IT space across all of the markets across the world right now.
All right, thank you, Mark. So that's very encouraging. I'm glad I'm in IT. So let's start the discussion going. Okay, so probably because Philippines has been known as an outsourcing destination, not only in IT but also call centers and BPO. But let's just start off the discussion with outsourcing opportunities. Like, because I sometimes with the evolution of how software has been moving from outsourcing maybe towards service type software as a service, is there still opportunities for like Philippines to get into outsourcing? Is this still in demand as compared to like 10, 15 years ago? Or has the paradigm changed in the last, I guess, few years? Any thoughts there?
So, Alan, I can go.
Yeah, sure.
So, for Japan market, yeah, SaaS, as you mentioned, the model changed to SaaS. It is changing to that direction, but very slowly, I would say, because Japanese company enterprise software market characteristic is predominantly they prefer custom developed software than the packaged software. So the development needs for those custom software is still there. It will still be there for quite some time. I saw the comparison of Japan market and US market about the enterprise software custom or package. 88% of the Japan software investment is for the custom built software and only 12 to 11% for the package, while US is more half of package and a custom made. And SaaS market of Japan is only 6% of the enterprise software market of Japan. So of around $100 billion enterprise software market of Japan, only $6 billion is a SaaS market. So even if SaaS is increasing in terms of the trend, still the custom development needs in Japan is so huge, and combined with the shortage of the talent, they have to source elsewhere. So the demand for the software development talent would definitely come outside, go outside Japan. Where would it go? Currently, Vietnam is a number one, and Myanmar emerged, but because of the geopolitical risk in Myanmar, what used to go to Myanmar is going some other countries. And in Philippines for 2020 was the second popular destination after Vietnam.
Right.
So that's Japan's situation. The trend-wise, it will still be there, the outsourcing demand.
That's good to know. You're still a business. Thanks, Tay. How about in Taiwan, Mike? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so in contrast to Japan, traditionally, I've been 4 years here, so I've been trying to model Japan for the software industry in the Philippines, in Taiwan, in terms of doing business with Taiwan. But for some reason, it's not really similar to the profile of Japan. It's not connecting somehow. I think it's because of the nature of their own industries. So I think the opportunities there. So because of that, the opportunities are great. But I think what we can do is we can focus on artificial intelligence, IoT, maybe data connected to software, and the software that's embedded into the hardware that Taiwan produces. Yes, so we've been trying to connect Taiwanese partners with Filipino providers, but for some reason it doesn't really seem to have traction. So I guess there is opportunity.
On the software and IoT side
Yes.
of the industry, right? Okay.
Yeah, but since you mentioned Slingshot, I've been bringing Slingshot to Taiwan actually since I moved here in 2017. So every year we have a Slingshot Philippines country pavilion at Innovex, their largest startup event in Taiwan. And the interest has always been in AI and IoT. So I think that's where we are headed.
Okay, that's good to know. Although there's one large Trend Micro, one large company from Taiwan who's headquartered here in the Philippines, and they've been sending quite a lot of work here, right?
Yes, well, there's also Asus and Acer. They also but these companies, they also hire a lot of Filipinos to come here and do in-house. So for some reason, the outsourcing business is not the same as Japan.
Okay. How about in Europe, and Mark, any thoughts on outsourcing?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's been obviously IT outsourcing has been something that's been quite prevalent across US and all of EMEA for quite some time, going back either outsourcing call centers, BPO, and obviously more recently sort of IT outsourcing. And I think in terms of your point around software as a service, there has been a huge shift as far as the technology vendors and specifically large enterprise towards more SaaS models. If you look at the penetration of Azure and AWS as public cloud infrastructure, everybody from the CIA through to HSBC and even mid-sized enterprises are all using AWS or Azure infrastructure. Clearly, in the CIA's case, it is not the same AWS infrastructure as everybody else is using, but it doesn't get away from the PR around using public cloud, right? But and that has driven a huge amount of demand on cloud and infrastructure skills in terms of the cloud migration. Now, I think it's safe to say that most enterprises, in terms of their initial cloud migration, have not necessarily seen the return on investment they were expecting from cloud over the last sort of few years. So there's a second wave now, I think, of cloud hitting certainly the US and EMEA of where do I now optimize my cloud environment? Where can I start using the huge array of tools, whether it's IoT, cyber, AI, in the cloud, in those public cloud environments, to start optimizing and transforming my business. And that's connecting to ERP transformation. It's connecting to becoming a data-driven organization. It's around creating differentiation in a digital and a physical world. So it's the SaaS models that people have embraced have created a huge amount of demand in those new kind of skills. The interesting thing, I think, from the analysis I've done of APAC is that there's probably a small lag in terms of, and I think it's the same for the Japanese market as well as even certain other markets in APAC, of that wide scale or large scale move to the cloud. So if you can get ahead of the curve, because I do think that will start to hit, APAC, very, very shortly, of those new kind of capabilities. So data engineers, people familiar with cloud. Obviously in APAC, GCP is a far more compelling. They're playing catch up in EMEA and US, but GCP is getting ahead of the game in APAC, and you've obviously got more localized public cloud infrastructure like Alibaba as well. So I do think that having that depth of skill in those kind of disciplines could create some really exponential growth as far as IT outsourcing is concerned. The other interesting thing, just building on that very, very briefly, is obviously there are huge concerns everywhere in the world at the moment around data sovereignty, data privacy. Where is that data going? There is even conflict between the US and EMEA in terms of GDPR and a variety of different regulations now that are preventing that transfer of data. I remember when I first set up one of the first AI sort of consumer-facing AIs for a large government agency using IBM software. Watson was based in the US. So we had to create all manner of abstraction layers around that technology to be able to access that AI brain hosted in the US even for a UK client. What that does, however, in my view, is create opportunities. Because if you're in the same market and you've got those data sovereignty, that means that nearshore capability and onshore capability can be more and more prevalent for large enterprises looking to transform in the local market, which I think then presents significant opportunities across all of APAC, but certainly Japan, Indonesia, and Malaysia. As those markets start to digitize at pace, then everyone will be looking at optimizing those IT sort of infrastructure investments, and they will need talent across the entire IT spectrum to be able to meet those commitments.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about cloud migration and turning to creating new types of positions, like new roles, right? So there will be like cloud engineers. What are the new positions you've seen or type of work that's being in demand now because of this?
Oh, it's anything, and I do mean anything to do with cyber, IoT, cloud infrastructure, cloud engineering, and anything to do with data and artificial intelligence. You can just name your price. Yeah, literally in some of the markets at the moment. To give you an example, even things, business intelligence, Tableau, Power BI, Click, that can be effectively done in a nearshore environment. Onshore resources, you're looking at $2,000 a day as a day rate in certain markets across EMEA at the moment for a business intelligence consultant. A cloud engineer, $1,500, or a senior experienced cybersecurity SME, $3,000 a day. Now, if you start looking at what are the skills that SME will need near shore to support what they're doing in the market, you are still looking at premium prices as far as that skill set is concerned.
Okay, but which among them can be outsourced? Like which among these skills you think can be sent out to other countries?
In my view, you look at even cloud infrastructure, right? Cyber, data analytics. There's a lot of heavy lifting involved in all of those disciplines, right? Especially with large enterprise. There's a lot of legacy. There's a lot of data. Most of it needs to be structured, needs to be cleansed, needs to be organized before you get any value from your IT investments. And how do you then minimize your past IT debt? You will need, I'm a very strong believer in terms of the prime Scrum team in market, supported by a number of other then Scrum teams then in a nearshore environment that you're able to scale up and scale down more effectively because they're in a shared services environment. So I think what you have to do is work very closely with the SMEs that are in market, but where are then the more where can you then turn the handle and do the heavy lifting across those disciplines then in an IT outsourced environment? So I think it covers all of those areas, because let's be fair, mid-level bank in Japan, or a mid-level bank, or even a large bank in Singapore, they're not going to be able to find 10, 20, 30 experienced cybersecurity engineers to be on site working with their teams around, because it's such a complex and regulated environment. Where are they going to tap into using secure communication links that team of 20, 25 cybersecurity engineers that'll work with that 5 or 10 people that are on site in the market working with the client, in their offices? So I think that's a real interesting opportunity there, from where IT outsourcing needs to go in terms of its future direction, and move away from more commodity engineering technology and custom software development to exploiting existing cloud infrastructure, public cloud, and all of the services then that are included within that I've just mentioned around cyber, data, etc., and IoT.
So we're looking at having a combination of people on site and then the bulk of the work somewhere.
What's critically important in my, having been client side and on the sort of consultancy side, if you're going to get true value out of IT outsourcing and getting value for your IT investments, you need an experienced team on site working with a client, helping them frame and reframe the challenge, understand their operational and technology sort of capabilities, and then translating and working cohesively then with a nearshore team. And then they take it back and then they frame and then deliver that in a collaborative way to the client. That's the secret sauce for doing outsourcing in the right way. It's no longer feasible just to throw stuff over the fence, expect magic to happen and that to be thrown back over the fence, and then create value for the client.
That would be nice.
It would be wonderful if we could do that, right? But it's
Right. So we're continuing on that pay. I wonder, like, for Japanese market, I think it's important that you can speak Japanese, right? I mean, there has to be, need to be able to breach that communication barrier.
That has been changing, Alan. Thanks for that question, that topic. So I've been watching the Japan-Philippine IT industry and outsourcing relations for the past almost 20 years. And I really see the change of Japanese companies, especially the young leader-led venture companies. There are a lot of them who can just do business in English. Compared to 20 years ago, the demand for the Japanese-speaking engineers in the Philippines is less. It shows in our survey at the SODEC. Now about 50% of the company says it's either okay to do business in English or preferable Japanese, but they can manage the business in English. Compared to 10 years ago, it's 75%. They're all looking for Japanese speaking. And when they open the mouth, how many Japanese speaking engineers does Philippines have? That was the first question anybody I meet coming from Japan to the Philippines, but I don't see that anymore. So yes, Japan side, English capability have been improving. Yet, if you have the Japanese speaking resource, your advantage is still very huge. I can say that. So it's not a must-have for all the companies in Japan, unlike before. But if you do have a Japanese speaking resource, it's a big advantage.
Any thoughts as to which technology you think would be more in demand for outsourcing in Japan?
Well, for everything, it's same, the technology-wise, AI, IoT, and then it's not recognized that the Philippines is strong in, e-commerce site development as well. So I listed AI, IoT, and EC related technologies.
All right, but I do recognize, like in Monster Lab, the reason why there's still strong outsourcing to Vietnam is that there are more Vietnamese who can speak Japanese.
The volume, yes, volume-wise.
But I think in general, that's also true.
Mm-hmm. In general, yes, true. But the trend has been changing. English is okay. And when we talk to the Japanese companies to sell Philippines, we encourage them to think Philippines as a partner in the global business. If you're going to develop the end product which you're going to use in Japan market, maybe if the Japan is the end user, you need the Japanese speaking engineer to create the Japanese user interface product. But if you are going to develop something for the global market, Philippines is the best partner. Philippines can do something that the engineers in the Vietnam cannot do, some engineers in Myanmar cannot do. One more thing Filipino are good at is after development, the production stage support and customer support, tech support, those areas Philippines can also do. those are the differentiation of the Philippines compared to Vietnam and Myanmar and Bangladesh that are the typical competitors for the Philippines.
That's a very good tip. I think that's true because I've seen this in Monster Lab. We do have Japanese clients, but they can speak English very well, so we were able to develop the entire project with them.
Yeah, the resource size of the Philippines is not so huge. So you don't have to go for the bulk of the market in Japan. You have to have a good match with a niche of Japan who are willing to do business in English and looking for a partner for the global business.
Right.
How to find the niche is the strategic approach.
Yeah, that's one of the bigger questions actually. If you do have questions, or sorry, if you have questions about, for our panelists, please feel free to post them in the Facebook chat, and we'll be happy to address them. So to move on, Mike, for you, you've been to other countries as well, right? Europe, US. Any thoughts about outsourcing in the other countries aside from Taiwan that you've seen?
Well, first, I'd like to follow through with what Abby has said about language. I think Taiwan, for the most part, is similar to Japan. As early as 2 years ago, the government announced that they want to have a bilingual population in 10 years. So I guess that's where opportunities for Filipino providers lie. A lot of the products of Taiwanese companies are sold worldwide. They are global leaders in their fields, right? So the opportunities would be in localization and adapting the products, hardware embedded with software, and I think that's where our engineers and our software IT experts can play a role. As far as other countries, I think generally we've seen that software as a service is growing fast and taking over the cloud computing market, while software is still in demand since some customers or projects are more sensitive to data, privacy, security, or needs more customization. So customization actually is where Filipinos can play a good role at.
Yeah.
So
I think they mentioned a very good point earlier, like it's their window to the world, right? So that's how Japan or Taiwan can actually access the other parts of the world, leveraging our English and customer support, English language proficiency and customer support skills.
yeah,
Um,
I'm sorry, Alan. And of course, we
sorry,
just don't
go
want
ahead.
to think in the lower echelons of service. We want to go up the value chain. This is what we want to position our services in IT and software for the world. So we want to go up to the value chain. That's why we're trying to get more niche on AI and IoT and data science as an expertise for the country, and then target niche, just what Abby has said.
Yeah, completely agree with everything sort of Michael and Abby have said, and I think certainly from a Filipino perspective, you can actually look at where can you elevate to that we are a premium location for these kind of premium services. Yeah, stay away from commodity, but look at investing into skills and experience, etc., around all of the things that we're discussing, because I think I'm seeing a shift, certainly in the large enterprise, global enterprise, away from your historical capacity models of we just need headcount, or it's a capacity sort of measurement in terms of an output, as I like to call it, right? We're moving away from output and we're moving towards outcome. And I think as enterprises become more mature in their thinking, start realizing that IT is an investment, not a cost. It can actually, but unfortunately, it's been seen as a cost in the past because the return on investment has not been realized through to bad strategic decisions or bad implementation or bad management or bad change management. But we are seeing that change. That is then driving what is the outcome that I want to deliver with my technology partners? What is the outcome for my business? What is the outcome for my consumers? So if you can position the country as an outcome focused provider of premium skills and capabilities and experience, that is a really interesting space that you could be able to create some serious significant growth around over the coming years, because Japan and Taiwan have fantastic global reputations for quality. Yeah, everyone looks at both of those locations as being premium places for great quality services, products, a focus on attention to detail, etc. So there's no reason why the Philippines cannot follow in terms of becoming a premium location for those kind of specialist and increasingly scarce skills across the world.
Mm-hmm. So, Mark, in the UK, where do usually companies outsource to? Like, if you're gonna outsource, where do you usually go?
Anywhere and everywhere, I think, has been the historic trend. I think it's safe to say in the past there was a huge push towards India. Yeah, started with call centers, obviously from a telephony world, and I am old enough to remember when working for a very large UK bank when we started migrating to telephony channels. The bank branches were up in arms, and then when we launched digital, then the telephony channels were up in arms, and then when we launched mobile, then all the digital guys were up in arms as well. So there was this catalog of advancement that caused huge amount of concern, but huge amounts of drove a huge amount of change within the bank. So it started with our call center, and I think that has then changed into large IT outsourcing capabilities now in India as well. What we've seen in the last probably 5 to 7, 8 years is a shift towards Eastern Europe. But what Eastern Europe has done, certainly countries within Central and Eastern Europe, which are inside the EU, so Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, have now positioned themselves as being premium IT outsourcing kind of locations. They're inside the EU, so you have less challenges around data sovereignty, data privacy, GDPR, but they've got a very, very strong reputation for highly skilled, experienced IT software development. What you've then got in terms of other parts of Eastern Europe, Armenia, Belarus, Ukraine, and clearly those are 3 countries with a number of both political and social challenges at the moment, but they are making huge investments into developing IT talent, and there are a number of very, very interesting companies across all 3 countries that are developing significant presence in terms of supporting UK companies, other companies in the EU. But interestingly, Armenia, Belarus are hotbeds of IT outsourcing into the North American and specifically US market. So very large Armenian network in the US, and a lot of US companies are either US technology companies are outsourcing work to those countries, or sometimes even enterprise brands are using them, sort of those markets directly, because the price point is significantly lower. So I think what I've observed across Eastern Europe is, excuse me, lower level skills, more commodity IT outsourcing and development, very strong capabilities across Armenia, Ukraine, and Belarus. More premium services, like we've been discussing on the call so far, are generally more aligned to the Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and other markets, Czech Republic, etc., across EMEA. Interestingly, we're now also seeing, if you look at the MENA region, an uplift in Morocco and Jordan from an IT outsourcing perspective as well, in terms of tapping into new talent. And obviously what they have and offer something different, as we're seeing significant increases in market, interest in Saudi Arabia, where there's massive investments going on to new smart cities, in public infrastructure, digitalization of the country. UAE, obviously a market leader in many aspects. That localization of IT outsourcing and the ability of speaking Arabic local language is very, very important as far as the MENA region is concerned, and that is driving increases in capability and investment in IT outsourcing across Jordan, Morocco, and other parts of the MENA region. So, and it comes back to, I think, what I said earlier, it's becoming more localized in terms of its nature. Large enterprise clients want those teams closer to them. They want them to understand the local regulatory environment. There are clearly language issues that are becoming less relevant, I think, in most markets now, but they just need to, they just want those teams slightly closer to them from a time zone and a cultural perspective. So it's driving more of an onshore and nearshore sort of strategy for more often than not, rather than you're shipping something halfway across the world into a completely different kind of time zone or culture. So yeah,
a couple of very interesting points there with regards to the advantages being part of the EU, less restrictions for the data sovereignty. Same with time zone. So that probably explains why it's also hard for Filipinos to get projects in, especially in the European part of the world. We do have a lot of outsourcing in the US though. I think because if the cultural affinity with the US in the past. But I guess that this also goes to show that maybe we should focus more outsourcing to nearshore countries like Japan and Taiwan, right? Tay, you have any thoughts or you might want to add to that?
Yeah, of course, time zone is one factor. Being just there are several advantage of the Philippines being a good offshore development destination for the Japanese companies. And in fact, maybe not many people would know that Japanese companies have been outsourcing to the Philippines from probably mid 80s. So it's more than 30 years going on. It's just that not in a huge scale compared to the US market, but it has been steadily going and growing. I would say even if we look at the PSIA registered companies, 60 plus companies, Japanese companies are registered under software development. And if we add some other IT industry related, 100 something Japanese companies are doing IT work in the Philippines and also outsourcing to the Philippines. So demand in Japan is increasing because of the shortage of the talent, and 1 hour time difference is good. English language compared to other language like Vietnamese language or Chinese language, Japanese do study English. So being able to understand each other, even in broken English, it's still a advantage for Japanese to come to the Philippines. And Japanese capability of the English language is increasing. And what's good about Japanese company for me is they pay on time. You don't have difficulty collecting money from them. So that's one important thing.
Very true.
Yeah. Another thing is the reality of the Philippine software companies, very small. I would say 80% of the companies are less than 100 people. So, and then you cannot really accommodate huge enterprise requirements. In most of the Philippine outsourcing vendors cannot accommodate a huge deals, huge project. So small company in Japan and small company in the Philippines, it's a good match. So that's the kind of niche market we have to consciously pursue. Right size versus right size. So Philippines has a good chance to be matched with mid to small companies in Japan for the outsourcing opportunities.
Okay. All right. But do you think, or if I run a software company, and what are ways that I can equip my people like to learn to improve their Japanese skills, or is that even possible?
It takes time and money. I've seen companies in the Philippines who do invest in the Japanese language training, but I've only seen that among the Japanese-owned companies who exclusively cater to the Japan market. So Japan is a very strategic market or only market for them. That's why they are willing to invest language capability development among their employees. Filipino-owned company, I would only know one or two only who are investing on the Japanese language development. So if you are strategically focusing on Japan as key market, and if you're willing to wait for the long-term return on investment or the language education, yes, you may want to do it. But otherwise, if I were the owner of the software outsourcing company in the Philippines, I would look for Japanese companies who can do business with me in English.
Oh, okay. All right. How about in terms of the niche market, like any of this, like any industry that all these small companies would be into, would be interested in?
Industry. In any country, I think the IT investment comes number one from the banking and finance, manufacturing, and then government, right? Those are the three
But
major.
none of them are small.
Those are not for the small companies. So if I think it's a venture startup space, startup companies in Japan who may not have enough resource on their own to do the development that could be a one good match for the Philippine-based outsourcing provider to look for. That's one. And some others, mid-sized IT companies in Japan. They're not end users, but they are the one getting projects from their customer, but they want to outsource it to somewhere else. Probably the Monster Lab is similar case, yes.
I would very much agree with that. With the, I've spoken probably to over 100, 150 companies across Eastern Europe in the last sort of 4 or 5 months. And it's interesting that pretty much all of the ones with 100, 150 headcount or less, over 50, 60% of their portfolio comes from startups.
Yes.
Yeah, so they're working with startups because ideally funded startups, and it's an area that you have to do quite a bit of due diligence around if you're going to start creating the portfolio there. But there's a very, very large portfolio within the startup. It's very rare that an organization of that size will be dealing with a large enterprise, because if you want to start getting into the large enterprise, you have to have the various ISO and various other certifications in place before they will generally deal with you. Now, interestingly, though, the rest of the portfolio, that even 50, 60%, is working with other IT companies. And it's interesting, there was 2 or 3 relatively large organizations in Ukraine that were actually looking at the Philippines and Vietnam as hotbeds for e-commerce talent, which is what Abby mentioned previously. So they're seeing them as rich seams of talent in e-commerce and MarTech they want to tap into, because they don't have that necessarily depth of talent pool in their local market. So they're then looking to work with companies in those markets to service the clients that they're seeing across EMEA and the US, which is an interesting space to look at if you want to look west as well as looking east in terms of that kind of sort of demographic. And I think we're also seeing it, if you look at e-commerce, there was a really interesting report, I think by IDC, that said they're expecting to see an explosion in e-commerce across Malaysia and Indonesia, with 300 million kind of users all now looking for digital content, digital shopping experiences, digital kind of experiences. A lot of it driven in a post-pandemic kind of world as well. So potentially e-commerce, MarTech, business intelligence and consumer intelligence platforms could also be very, very interesting space, because what that also offers up is it's more often than not a regulated environment. It's not a large bank, telco, manufacturer. So you haven't got the same level of regulatory and compliance requirements. They are retailers, travel, hospitality. So that is often an easier entry point, but those markets are potentially going to see a surge across various parts of APAC, as well as obviously, the other part of APAC, the English-speaking part of APAC, Australia, New Zealand, are also seeing significant now investments in terms of digitization. There's some big banks, large enterprise, etc. in Australia, not at the same level of maturity as most sort of EMEA and sort of US organizations, now looking to make very significant and strategic investments into IT. And time zone, culture, language, etc. would be very, very aligned in those markets.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. Like New Zealand, Australia would be a good market for Philippines. Now we're talking a bit deeper about startups. I was wondering, Mike, if you have, if you've seen any good startup ideas lately.
Well, actually, for the startup space, I think a lot of the opportunities for Filipinos would be in fintech. Taiwan has actually taken a look at our experience in fintech, because we are a very good mix of companies providing fintech services to a market that's very much our own. The Filipino diaspora, 10 million of us are living abroad. So, and that's created a market and also a breeding ground for fintech companies in the Philippines that have actually captured the attention of other companies, especially here in Taiwan. And aside from looking at us as a market, they're also looking at the expertise that we have developed from among the fintech players in the Philippines, maybe partner with them. So in startups, fintech, aside from the ones that I mentioned earlier, and just to refer to what Mark was saying, it's very interesting, because back when I was based in London, we were positioning the Philippines as an offshoring destination. And in fact, I received an award from the National Outsourcing Association for the Philippines as a preferred destination. And we earned that award 3 times. But it just goes to show how far in a decade times have changed. Now, you're absolutely right, Mark. Nearshoring is they've been saying it back when I was in London, but now they're already doing it. It's because in Eastern Europe, the companies and the countries actually opened up and actually beefed up their expertise and their service capabilities. And for us in the Philippines, I think our companies should do well to look at how these Eastern European countries and companies are doing to position our services as well and find that niche. So yes, nearshoring is one, but if we can offer them in the Philippines because of our English, because of our capabilities, we could also be a very viable alternative still.
Yeah, so if we're talking of nearshoring, then we're looking at Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, maybe, because these are, within our time zone. So that would be probably a better, target market segment for Philippines.
Japan.
What I'm saying is, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What I'm saying is, if it's we can surpass the need for nearshoring if we can offer our services much better than what nearshoring can offer. You know what I mean? If we have, better options, better costs, better quality as well. And we've been there before. We were in the top pyramid of the pyramid for servicing the UK market. But since the world has moved into digital, I think a lot of Eastern Europe has gained ground as well.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
And a lot of that in Eastern Europe has been driven by very, very good collaboration with academic institutions as well, who are driving huge investments into STEM subjects. IT engineering, computer science, etc. So there's a lot of funding and incentivization for academic institutions to start, pushing those, kind of skills. And they've done that very, very well across most parts of Eastern Europe. So what you've done is very quickly created a very large pool of IT talent that these companies can then start tapping into. Now, interestingly, they're now starting to run out of talent locally because the demand is so high, certainly in last couple of months, spiked enormously. So they're running out of talent and now they're starting to look east in terms of augmenting their own teams for the demand that they're seeing across sort of EMEA and the US. So there's an interesting market there. But what Abhi mentioned earlier, I thought was very, very interesting. If you look at the respective size of the organizations in the Philippines, that would lend itself really well to some of those specialist premium disciplines that we were talking about throughout this in terms of data and IT, moving away from that large scale commodity IT outsourcing to IT outsourcing that specializes in certain premium disciplines, potentially is a really interesting space for the Philippines, because then you don't need 300, 400, 500, 600 people sitting in a center. You need 100, 150, and half of them could be doing cyber, half of them could be data compliance, information security. And those are, as I said, any market anywhere in the world wants to tap into that kind of skill set, but there's a massive increase in demand coming in APAC and Japan for all of those kind of skill sets.
Yeah, very, very interesting thought about developing the talent, because earlier we were talking about AI, data analytics, but at the back of my mind I was wondering if we have enough talents who actually know AI. I barely knew a few companies who's actually specializing in this, and probably that's one thing we should look into also, like how do we improve our skills in terms of these technologies. In line with that, actually, Tay, we have a question for you that says, how does company work culture between other countries like Japan and Philippines, work or clash? Any thoughts?
Crash? Okay.
Clash, like differences in culture.
Yes, crash, right? Interesting question, because I do cross-cultural leadership workshops for the companies working with Japan and Japanese expats working with the Filipinos. Yeah, top three crash when Japanese work with the Filipinos. Number one, time. the sense of time. Number 2, the threshold of the acceptable quality. Number 3, reporting, progress, management of the progress. Because in Japanese culture, they would like a very detailed reporting of the progress. While in the Philippines, if you follow up too frequently, it is seen as micromanagement, and that is a demotivating factor for the Filipinos. Why are you checking on me so frequently? Don't you trust me? I'm doing my work. But in Japan, they want the progress very detailed, granularity. So those are the 3 major points I always hear from many people: time, quality, and then reporting. So that one you have to adjust to each other by communicating well to establish, agreement. So this is how we are going to work together.
Yeah, that's very true. I can feel what you're saying. It was quite an adjustment for me also. The good thing though is that since most meetings are now online, we're mostly on time. We rarely get late, unlike before. Because of the travel, you always get late of meeting, then eventually get used to it. But I think things have changed because of this COVID. Now that there's no transportation, most of the people I meet, most meetings are on time already. So I hope, we'll be able to continue changing our concept of time. But that's a very good thoughts. Mark, I'm sure, how's the reporting like, or how do you think is it working with European and with Asians? Like any thoughts?
I mean, there's a lot of cultural alignment and a lot of cultural differences, certainly between, if you look at our markets, let's look at Monster Lab, Japanese company, a lot of my team are based in Japan. I also have a lot of my team based in Denmark, and then I have some teams in the UK, but they're spread over the world. But the 2 big hubs for us internationally from a client-facing perspective is Japan and Denmark. And it's interesting, I was talking to a facilitator, we were looking at our corporate strategy, last September, and he pulled me aside before the meeting started and he said, you do realize that in terms of personality types, the Danes and the Japanese are the absolute opposite ends of personality types in terms of business. And I'm glad he gave me that heads up, because all of that started to manifest itself through the next 3 days of Japanese people being very, very, respectful and often quiet, and etc. And then Danes being very blunt, very, I suppose, forward, and them interpreting silence as agreement, and clearly completely opposite in Japanese culture. So you could see, there was quite a lot of facilitation that had to go on in terms of that. So I think it's Europeans specifically, and I could probably say the same for Americans as well, having lived there. Their cultural awareness is not necessarily as good as they think it is. So, and that can cause some challenges. And I think the key with any of this, whatever the market is communication and transparency. And I do agree with you, Alan. If the pandemic has provided any benefit, it is that more frequency of interaction, as probably slightly more transparency in terms of communication as well, because we're not able to do that face-to-face interaction as much as we possibly could. But I think there are a lot of it's understanding the culture and the context of the work, and is very, very important. And I think where I've had success working certainly in IT outsourcing, irrespective of where that IT outsourcing is spending the time on the people and cultural aspects of the IT outsourcing, making sure that the teams, wherever they're located, understand the context, the business challenge, a little bit of like the local market, the business culture, etc. Spending a bit of time up front, bringing them up to speed, and also the other way as well, in terms of them understanding the local working environment, the mentality, etc. To your point, Abby, around time, around quality, what is important, what are the key things we should report, and just getting those, as with any project, just getting the operational guidelines in place on both sides, that everybody knows how we should be operating and how we should be interacting, and how you can get the most out of those kind of co-working sort of environments.
Yeah, may I add, Alan?
Sure.
In terms of the cultural spectrum, I think Taiwan would be very near to Japan. because even if Taiwan is, well, a Chinese culture, they have been under Japan for about maybe 50 years or more.
Really?
So they have a strong affinity with the Japanese culture. I think what we can do is, well, I've spoken to a lot of CEOs and chairmen of Taiwanese companies here, and they actually like Filipino engineers because it's their strategy for bridging their products with their global markets, because we have a Western outlook, somewhat. So I think it's very important to know that this peculiar skill set is inherent to us as Filipinos, and we could play a role if we optimize this in terms of the business setting, IT services, and SaaS and outsourcing.
Yeah, it's interesting that Abby mentioned the three. Let me just share my experience. So first one in the time. So I'm hoping COVID will change that culturally. But fortunately for I mean me, I'm never late. But for my Japanese counterparts also, they're a bit, more I guess respectful. So they'd understand if you're a few minutes late. But we try to start on time as much as possible. So I think that's hopefully with COVID, we'll be able to change that in terms of mindset of the Filipinos. And then secondly, in terms of quality, well, for our Manila office, I don't think that was an issue. In fact, we produce better quality than other outsourcing locations like Vietnam or anywhere else. So that's something I'm specifically proud of, and we've heard very good feedback also in terms of the delivery of the quality. As for reporting, I think this is more of a change in mindset. I really struggled at first. Like they would ask for this very long Excel, like A to Z is not enough. You have to scroll all the way to AZ, to get all this data intact. But it's more of like getting used to adjusting to that. But that is really true. I've seen that when we started, merging with Monster Lab. In fact, I agree. Those were like the three most important things that we've adopted from joining, Monster Lab. So it's gonna be the same if you start working with Japanese companies. We do have another question here before we end our program for today. How can a local company assess the cost? Oh, now we're going to the cost of service in terms of software development for foreign clients. So I guess it's clear, like the reason for outsourcing is really cost. Especially for custom software. So any thoughts, like how can we give a competitive advantage in terms of cost, or is this actually a factor when companies outsource to Philippines?
Just on that, and I will hand across to the sort of Abby and Michael, but I think cost is less of a factor than it used to be if you've got the right skill set and the right capabilities and experience. I think and I think this is the same for the clients as well as IT outsourcers now, in terms of you've got the three metrics of time, quality, and cost, right? You can usually have two of the three. You can't generally have all three. And I think sort of time and quality is now two of the most important factors for most organizations, even large and small, because there is a move away from, and I've seen this in procurement departments, and I've seen this in sort of in the client side roles I've had as well, in terms of buying the cheapest does not necessarily give you a return on investment. And I think there is a far better focus now in terms of enterprise organizations on where am I getting a return? What is my return on investment? And are they seeing their investments in IT as being investments, not cost, as I touched on before? So I think cost is important. Of course it is. It needs to be competitive. But you need to think about what is the return on investment you're providing for the client? Are they tapping into a specific skill set that then can optimize that cost discussion to an investment discussion and a return on investment discussion, which is going to be far more important. And that, I think, is a differentiator, not cost as a differentiator, but quality, time, access to key skills that will help the client unlock value in their own organization.
Anything to add, Abby or Mike?
Yeah, I agree with Mark in the sense that cost arbitrage is not the top reason to consider outsource compared to the past. but still the cost is important, but not as much as before. In that part, I agree. I'm trying to understand this question though. How to assess the cost of service for software development? Recently I read the report of this year. The Japanese companies typically achieved about 30% cost reduction of software development by offshoring to Asian countries. So that may be a kind of benchmark if you can offer overall, not per person unit cost, but overall project cost saving of around 30%. Maybe will that answer your question?
Yeah, but to Mark's point, because the problem with Philippines, if cost is our advantage, then we're probably not gonna be lower in terms of cost than Vietnam and Bangladesh. Like, their salaries and
Well, Alan, I was
lower.
surprised to see that the programmers cost in Vietnam is now higher than Philippines. For
Really?
Japan market, yeah, slightly higher Vietnam.
Okay.
It was different a few years ago.
My thought here is I think if we were still in the world where we are delivering lower value services in IT, cost would be a big factor. But as we move up the value chain in the level of high value services that we deliver, I think cost would be less of a factor because it's the value of that service, the very high value of that service. So I think it's really related to that in that regard.
All right. So this has been a very interesting discussion. We are a few minutes past our time. So I'd like to thank everyone, Mark, Abby, and Mike, for attending, for being, sharing your thoughts about our topic. Also to our live viewers. So soon we'll see a lot more people watching after we've saved this video. So hopefully we're able to share, and our viewers are able to learn from your thoughts and insights about outsourcing, well, global opportunities. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Bye.
It's been a
Bye.
pleasure,
Thank you.
Michael, Abby. Thank you. Enjoy the
Bye.
rest
Thank
of
you
your
very
day.
much for having
Weekend.
me, and happy weekend to
Yeah,
everyone.
we all had fun. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.